Record decline. All right, everybody. Welcome. Great morning to you. I always love spending this midweek anchor with you guys. And as always, first and foremost, I just want to thank you for keeping the commitment that you made to yourself, right? Doing what you said you were going to do. And that's showing up on the Wednesday morning calls, getting those mental reps in so you can finish the week strong. And obviously always have that white belt mentality. There's always stuff we need to be learning. We always need to be training, right? We're business athletes. It just happens to be what a great line heading into this next guest speaker. So I want to share with you guys how this all came about. Yesterday in our Deep Roots call, I was just sharing about there's abundance all around us, right? Like if we look for it, there's amazing relationships and people that could be beneficial to your business, your life, you name it. And it's all around us. Most people just don't take the opportunities to see it. And, I was in New York for my anniversary last week, and we're sitting at this really good restaurant, and I'm sitting there, and it's my wife, my brother, and sister-in-law, and I'm looking behind me, and this is just how I am. I'm always like paying attention. And I see these two gentlemen, and one's pulling out a brown bag, and they're sitting there looking at this amazing shoe, and I'm just sitting there, what are they doing? And they're like smacking the shoe, they're like looking it up and down. And the funny thing is, man, I'm sitting there talking to them, I'm like, guys, look, I was like, there's two people back there looking at this shoe, and I'm like, we're in New York. I was like, I guarantee you they are like some, high-level shoe executives or something like that, and they're all laughing. And I was like, watch. So, fast forward 10 minutes later, they get up, and I kindly call this gentleman over, and he came over with a big smile on his face, and I was like, hey, with those shoes, what are you doing over there with those shoes? And he was like, oh, I was in the shoe business for a long time. We're coming out with a new product. He told me his name, and then he started just, look, you can probably Google me and find some stuff, but in short, like I was a part of, president of Timberland. He started rattling off. I was like, oh my goodness, is this not exactly what I thought it was going to be? And then, he was so kind, he brought my wife over, he had a gentleman in from London, and they were studying this new shoe that they're bringing to the market, and it was just amazing. And the one thing that I really loved about that interaction, was our next guest speaker, Gene McCarthy, was his kindness, his humility. I mean, somebody who's achieved stuff at such a high level. I apologize for being ignorant to not know, now I know, who he is, but there's probably a lot of people who know him, who want to talk to him, and it was just beautiful to see how kind he was. And, sure enough, next thing you know, he's now speaking with all of us too. So it's just amazing when you have that mindset of abundance, want to shake hands, want to be more interested than interesting. There's opportunity all around us, ladies and gentlemen, and I feel like this was something, I'm always in that divine spiritual mode, and I feel like this was supposed to happen. And we got Mr. Gene McCarthy in here with the Harvest. So Gene, I just want to thank you for being here with my brothers and sisters of the Harvest community. We got all types of different entrepreneurs, salespeople, you name it. So this is going to be an amazing call. And Gene, if I could just rattle through real quick before I introduce you, just so everybody kind of understands a little bit of your background. Gene McCarthy is a distinguished leader, change maker, and brand disruptor. He's essentially the godfather of footwear. Wow, that's a powerful statement. Having held president and SVP level roles at iconic brands like Asics, Under Armour, Reebok, Timberland, and Merrell. Gene spent his first 21 years of his career at Nike in various capacities, including global director of sales and retail marketing for the Jordan brand. I don't know how much more you guys want to hear, but man, this is just amazing. Mr. Gene McCarthy, welcome to the Harvest, my friend. Great morning to you. How are you?
Great morning to everybody. Devin, it's good to see you again. And the only regret I have when we saw you at lunch the other day in the city was we didn't get to buy your gang a round of drinks, but next time I'll do that for you. So,
well, we still got to buy your shoes when they come out, so we still owe you something too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance.
Awesome. And by the way, author too at that. So once we end this call, I'll have Gene share more about his book so we can get some copies of that. But what I did, guys, is This is going to be a little bit different from some of our other calls. I wanted to really be intentional, and I just wrote down a lot of questions that I feel like are relevant to all of us, right? And you don't have to be the CEO of a billion-dollar company, but these are questions that I believe can help us in our seasons right now with some successful small businesses, some people trying to start a business, stuff like that. So, Gene, if you don't mind, I'm just going to rip through some questions and try and get as much value and wisdom as we can from you, my friend.
I'll do as much truth telling as I can, Deb. So go.
That's what I like to hear. So first and foremost, like this is a basic question, but like how did you get into the shoe business? Like, is this something you went to college for? Like, what kind of got you into this field?
Yeah. So first of all, everybody on this call, everybody in the world has a story. So I'm going to tell you my story, and then as I tell it, if you find it interesting, great. But more importantly, maybe it should alert all of you about your own story. So when I was 14 years old, I was the oldest of 5 kids, growing up in the Bronx. I didn't know it at the time, but we were poor. That shows we had good parents. But I saw the cover of Sports Illustrated, and there were 2 guys running on the cover, and I was gobsmacked by the picture. So I read the article, and it was about breaking the 4-minute mile. And right there, I went to dinner that night, fish sticks and corn. I vividly remember, and I announced everybody that I was going to break the 4-minute mile. I was just completely compelled by this. So I'll fast forward 8 years. I ended up, 4 years. I ended up as the fastest miler in New York City, which is in my hometown, which is a pretty good place to be the number one in anything. And then 4 years later, I had all these scholarship offers, because I did run fast. But what do? I pick a school 6 miles from my house in the Bronx. I went to Fordham University. There I became an All-American. And when I graduated, I only ran 4:03. So I didn't get my under 4-minute mile. So I did something unusual. Any kid today doesn't even know what this is. It's called writing a letter, pen, paper. And I wrote a letter to one of the guys on the cover that was on the cover of that magazine from 8 years earlier. His name was Marty LaCourie. And he went to Villanova and went to an all-boys Catholic high school like I did. And got his address from one of the Irish Christian brothers, and wrote him a letter thinking I'd receive like maybe a letter of encouragement or workouts or something, because I really wanted to give it one more shot. Instead, he invited me to move to Florida, where he lived. He ran a chain of athletic stores. At the time, they were called Athletic Addict. There were 100+ stores in the country. He was the third schoolboy in history to break the 4-minute mile. And so I moved down to Florida with a duffel bag over my shoulder, and I never looked back. So anyway, I trained with him for a couple of years, was a semifinalist in the Olympic trials, but all the way I was sponsored by Nike. I got free gear. I got plane tickets. Back then, there were strict amateur rules, not like today. And so I was one of their athletes, if you will. So when I stopped my career in 1982, I ended up getting a job with Nike as a tech rep. And I traveled all over the state of Florida, visiting stores, espousing the virtues of Nike, which wasn't the Nike that you know today. It was a $500 million in sales. Now it's 50 billion. So that begat not only a 40-year career in the athletic industry, but it also, if it weren't for that cover of that magazine, this is the story, because I'm still a kid from the Bronx. And I do look around restaurants too, because I need to know who friend or foe is before the subway doors close. I mean, that's just streetwise. But if I didn't see the cover of that magazine, I never would have received a free education, probably never would have gone to college. That wasn't in our family's, sights. Nobody else went to college. I never would have traveled the world, and I never would have had a 40-year career. So sometimes there's a little spark that, can change your life. So it's that magazine cover.
Wow. And I'll tell you what, it's not just that magazine cover. One of the things that I always preach about is attention to the small things, right? And personal touches is another thing. So I know Gene was joking about, most people don't write letters today, but I'll tell you what, nowadays, if you use handwritten letters, you will be able to make more of an impact than your automated mailer. And not only did that magazine cover create a spark for Gene, but what really created a spark was his way of going the extra mile. And I don't mean to, say that because we're talking about running here. But writing that handwritten letter created the real spark that led to Gene's journey. So, guys, I tell you all the time, man, so many times we miss the small opportunity. It could be a handshake, it could be walking over to a table, right? You never know where things will lead, but it wasn't just running, it was talk about wanting to do whatever it takes. What it takes is what it takes. And he went above and beyond to send a handwritten letter, and look where that changed the trajectory of his life. So I want everybody to think about that. Let's relate it to business. Who's your dream vendor, right? Who is it? Are you writing a handwritten card? Are you willing to go that extra mile and do that? Because that could lead to the next growth of your business and career. So next question. All right, so as we were reading this bio, and this was super interesting, right? You got, Asics, you have Nike, you have Timberland, you have Jordan. How was their approach different going to the market with new products, being, I guess, totally different lifestyles, in my opinion, right? Not just shoes, totally different lifestyles. What did you learn working with all those companies, and how did you identify, hey, well, this is why we chose to do this route, this is why we chose to do this route with this company, and this is all going to be relevant to you with whatever your product is. You're going to understand like your niche market, how to go about it, how to deploy that marketing campaign based off of the answer to this question.
Well, first of all, let me give you another little story, which I will put in the category of a piece of magic. And I decided I was going to run cross country at this Catholic high school right around the corner from Yankee Stadium. Not the best neighborhood. I went down to Paragon Sports in Manhattan and bought my first pair of running shoes, and they were called Tigers, which later became Asics. So my very first pair of shoes, 50 years later, I ended up becoming the president of the company. So, there is magic and everything. But to answer your question, I have a very unique view of this, and I'm sure everybody that's on this call with us probably shares this, is that it all begins with the consumer. As a matter of fact, when I was at the Jordan brand, I used to have a mantra, which is probably more true today than it was back then. And it was, we don't own this brand. Kids do. We just manage it for them. And my job was to listen and to look at what's going on out there. And then we always talk about these business terms like target consumer. I always looked at it at who's the consuming target. And by that, I mean, we made the greatest shoe in the world for the greatest player ever to play the game. However, we were uniquely aware that about 90% of the shoes that were sold never made it to a basketball court because they became a coveted possession. So while we were very aware of the target consumer, a kid that plays basketball, we also knew that there was a huge other market out there as well. And it's the same thing even with Timberland. Timberland, I was the president of Timberland for a couple of years, and they had a boot called the kids in the street called it the yellow boot. And it was actually a construction worker's boot. And it became fashion, and it became iconic, particularly in the 90s with hip hop and culture. And it just became something that was bigger than Timberland itself. But the idea of the boot was for blue collar workers in New England, that work construction, to keep their feet warm in the cold New England winters when they work in construction. Timberland never decided that boot was going to become an iconic, street style for kids in urban markets all over America. And that goes back to my point about, we don't own this brand, kids do. The kids decided that boot was really important to them for completely different reasons. And if you think about it, it was practical for them. They couldn't wear sneakers, which are their beloved uniform in the winter because your feet get cold. As legend has it, these kids, a handful of kids walked into an Army Navy store in Manhattan, saw the boot on the shelf, and the image of the boot said to them, this would be warm and comfortable. It didn't say, oh, that looks cool, because actually the shoe is not very cool at all. But cool or fashion, are decided by consumers. When I ran all of footwear at Under Armour, and the founder of the company, his name is Kevin Plank. If you don't know who he is, he's one of the most dynamic people I've ever met in my life. He's also impossible to work for because he's so dynamic. So let there be a lesson in that, being a dynamic leader. He bursts into my office one day and he says, hey, we need to get into fashion. And I said, well, give me an example of fashion. He goes, Chuck Taylors. Every little girl has a pair of Chuck Taylors. They're pink, they're plaid, they're purple, they're blue. And I said, that's not fashion. He goes, every girl has a pair, then it's fashion. I says, no, Chuck Taylors, the Boston Celtics won 11 world championships in those shoes. Those are performance footwear. Those little girls decided it would become fashionable, but the shoe was created to be a performance, item, not to be a fashion item. So these companies that try to be fashionable always fall flat because it's the consumer that makes the decisions. And you could even look today at, and I don't know if it's a great example, but it fascinates me to see something like Ozempic, which is really, now has an ulterior use, which has become its primary use, right?
Yeah.
For people in the market, but it was consumers who decided that. It was users who decided that. So, there's an old saying for you. I'll stop talking after this, Devin. There's an old saying in the marketplace: if a salesman were meant to speak, he or she would have two mouths and one ear. So you gotta look, but you really, really have to listen.
Man, as you talk about that, for some reason, what comes to my mind are all these, business owners that, they see that people are more interested in their product for other reasons. And I'm wondering how many business owners don't have that humility and can't remove their ego enough to like, no, this is what I've done it for. And it just crushes them. And then you got some of these other leaders who are smart like you, and they're like, no, the market is telling us what they love. So why are we going to go against the market? And that's some of you guys, whatever your business, you may, contracting, whatever it is. And sometimes your clients are giving you different feedback and different ideas. And I see it all the time to where everybody wants to be, well, I'm the specialist in this. I know what's best. And sometimes they could be giving you the next niche for your company or the next way to do business that more consumers would like, but you're not listening, right? There's this Instagram kid, younger guy, and he goes and he'll interview these super successful people in the street. And one of these, he interviewed this guy a couple, I think I saw it 2 days ago. And he was like, what is your secret to being, when did you make your first million? Sorry. And he was like, well, you shouldn't be asking me that. You should be asking me when I made my first billion. And he's like, oh, you're a billionaire. And he was asking him what his tips are. And he was like, listen. Like he kept hitting on the fact you need to listen. So Gene, you're spot on, obviously from your wisdom too, but that just validates it because I just heard it a few days ago.
Well, I'm going to make a lot of money tomorrow on Thanksgiving because I'll go to my large family at my mom's house in Long Beach, New York. And my nephews, all love to, they love to treat me like they're better than me and smarter than me. So here's a little holiday tip for you. I'm going to go there tomorrow and I'm going to say to this 4 or 5 of them, I'm going to say, listen, $20 in for each of you, right? $100. I'll put 120. And I guarantee you that I can do between 300 and 400 push-ups, right? Yeah. And they're gonna laugh because I'm 68 years old. So you know how many push-ups I'm gonna do? 4, because I said between 300 and 400. And that shows you that they don't listen. They think it's between 300 and 400 because I said between 300 and 400. See what I'm going? That's their listening skills. That'll be their lesson tomorrow, and I'll be $100 richer for it.
Wow, I'll tell you what, you got it. My listening skills need to level up too, because you have me thinking I'm like 300 to 400. I saw you in person. You definitely look like you're in shape, no doubt about it. All right, here we go. This is another great question too. What is the difference? And I've actually you must have did an interview in the past, because as I was learning more about you, I've identified some of these questions that you had answered on podcasts or radio stations, whatever it was. But I felt they were my favorites. The difference between a company and a brand.
Yeah, I write about that in my book. It's important to me. A company is this mechanism that ships, widgets to distribution centers, and then they sell them to businesses or consumers. A brand is more of an emotional feeling. It's more of, so you can work for a company, but you belong to a brand. And now there are many companies out there that think they were brands, and there are many brands that aren't good companies. But no matter how you slice it, a brand is this thing that has emotional connection with its consumers. It has a story to tell, and it also sells solutions for you. And but within a great brand, there has to be embedded a really good company. There has to be a mechanism that runs the brand. So, certain things like the company will make sure that it manages its budget. And let's take the marketing budget, for example. And that marketing budget is going to be a line item for the CFO. In a brand, there's a head of marketing that is looking for different ways to tell stories to the consumers. And so that marketing budget, the company will think it's an expense, but the brand guy will think it's an investment. So these are minor distinctions, but there is quite a difference. Now, I worked for, I'll tell you a story about if you think you have a great brand. So maybe some of you have heard of Asics. I'm on an airplane. I'm sitting in business class, and there's always the guy next to me. I hope it's none of you that has 2 drinks before we take off and wants to make friends with his aisle mate and wants to talk brashly about how they just they're just great at what they do and all that. You know who this guy is. Anyway, this guy asked me the dreaded question one time. He says, "So what do you do?" Oh boy. I said, "I'm in the athletic industry. I start ambiguous and then work my way down." What do you do? And he asked, he said, "Have you ever been to the Super Bowl?" Yes. Oh, I would love to go to the Super Bowl. So I was trying to deflate his bubble, but without bursting it. And I said, "Look, the best seat in the house for a sporting event is 2 feet from the fridge, 4 feet from the toilet. The line is shorter, the beer is cheaper and colder. And, I'm just trying to make it look like it's not that big a deal." Have you ever met any famous athletes? Oh, I've met plenty of famous athletes, but you know what? They're just people like us. They pull their pants on the same way. I was trying to give boring answers so I could end this conversation, even though I had earbuds in and he didn't. So then he said to me, the big dread question, "Who do you work for?" And I said to him, "Asics." He thinks for a minute, he looks out the window, comes back to me, goes, "Never heard of it." Now, this is a very sad story. Do you know why? Because he had a pair of Asics on. So in other words, he knew them as a certain shoe that had a certain name, but he didn't correlate it to the company because Asics, which is a Japanese owned brand, if they think they're a brand, but really with the name like Asics, it sounds like a pharmaceutical company. When the reality of it is, when you dig into the brand side, and this is what I tried to do when I was the president to bring it to the forefront, Asics is an acronym for a Latin phrase that loosely translated stands for of sound mind, of sound body. Now, how cool is that? Now, how did I not know that? How did the marketplace not know that? But my point is, Asics thinks it's a brand when actually it's a company that's dressed up like a brand, whereas Nike is a brand. And I think I don't have to explain that to you.
Oh my goodness. Could you imagine, right? And especially nowadays, back in the day, a while back, before social media and all that stuff, I don't want to give the blanket statement where a lot of people, there wasn't this movement to personal development, mind, body, spirit. There was, but now with social media, you get personal development events all day long now. Look, the Harvest is a personal development, professional development community. Imagine if there was a campaign around the mission of that acronym that you just said about Asics. My goodness, I feel like there would be a huge demand for those because of what they meant, right? Mind, body, so all that stuff in that message, man. That was a very good way to explain that to where it pierced my mind. Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about now that you told that story. All right, so a few other questions. I wrote down some from our Deep Roots community here. One big topic for us is we have a lot of our people in here, business owners in here. They're growing, right? But to really get that next level, it's through leverage. You got to bring in talent. You need people, right? You grow through people. So we're going to talk a few questions about the hiring process. And I know you're an authority in this. You speak all the time about it. You coached on it. And when I Google you, there's so many things about you speaking on hiring. So first question, how do you approach hiring and what does that process look like so you don't have to go through 15 people to find that one, if that makes sense? What do you think were your best practices to find that, we don't have to, if they pass this, then chances are, there's never going to be 100% success rate. At least I don't think so. Maybe you could tell me wrong, but this should really help nail down that hire for you if they pass this.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. Hiring today is very, very complex. And in the back half of my career, I had mostly executive, if not presidential positions. So I wasn't actually going through the 15 resumes. I had people go through that for me. But what I noticed is it struck me when I got to Asics in 2015, the talent acquisition team, all they did was sit in a room all day and look at LinkedIn. Now, that sounds, oh boy, but it actually does work. So if you're ever coaching any of your own kids or young people, like I do a lot, you need to make sure that they know what they're doing with LinkedIn, that it's compelling, it's storytelling, it speaks to a listener. It doesn't speak to themselves. But nonetheless, I'll say this: I have some theories about hiring. Um, I told my kids, I have 4 kids, and 3 of them have ended up in this industry. None of my help was needed. 2 of them are executives at Adidas, and the other is the baby of the family is 34, is a designer at Vans, the skate shoe company.
Oh, wow.
And I told them over the years that your resume will only get you an interview. It's your character that gets the job. So when I finally got to interview final candidates for any role, particularly not just leadership roles, there were certain roles within the company that I felt that I needed to be involved in. The first thing I would say when they got in and they're sitting there across from the president, they should be nervous. I take that as a sign of that they care. I don't think nervousness is a bad thing. I think it's good. And my first question is always, what are you doing here? And the reason is because everybody that's looking for a job is either leaving a job or going to a job, but you're never doing both. There are some people kids will answer the question and say, well, I'm not growing in my current role. I don't like my manager. I don't like this. I don't like that. That tells you a little bit more about the self-centeredness than it tells you about why he's there. If somebody says, I'm ambitious, I love the way your company is. And here's the other thing that young people do in interviews. They always say, here's how I see myself in 5 years. And I very sternly remind them, nobody cares. It's a business. They're not created for places for you to go between breakfast and dinner. It's a business. But I tell these kids, if you really want to score points in an interview, tell them, here's how I think I can help you. Even if you're just out of college, here's how I can help you. The other thing I do when I look at resumes, they all basically say the same thing, right? 68 Volkswagen Bug, runs like new, must see to believe, right? Every resume is great. And I always look at the top, and I like to look, because you're not supposed to ask, I like to look where they live, where they're from. And it's not because I need to know if they're in proximity to my business. I think there's certain cultural assets in different parts of our communities, that will tell a story about kids. So when mine says the Bronx, New York, it's usually an eye opener. I then go right to the bottom and I look at their extracurricular activities. Did they wait tables? Did they mow lawns? Did they do anything like that? Because that shows you that they have a hustle, and and then if they're in sports, I don't look at it because I'm an athlete and I work for athletic companies. I look at sports because it proves that they're motivated, there's self-discipline, and there's high levels of achievement when you're an athlete, no matter how good or bad you may be as an athlete. But I'll close with this, Devin, on hiring. The best thing to do is not hire who you're comfortable with. Sometimes you have to hire outside of your own comfort zone, because you need a variety of thinking, at the table or in any organization. So sometimes you have to hire the disruptor, and you never hire their qualifications. You hire what you determine is their potential. And potential is different than what the resume says, because if you hire them and they excel in your company, they have exceeded the requirements that you are looking at in their resume. So I hope some of this is helpful to your audience.
So that last line, right? One, I feel like it's a gift and a curse. For me, is sometimes I believe I see more in other people than they see for themselves, right? So you say potential, and how, you know, when you're interviewing somebody or when you meet somebody, you can, like, I could see, man, that person can do this. Like, I know I could see, like, that they're from their story, they could take it here, blah 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 blah. And then you, let's just say you hire them, and man, I just fell for that. Like, they had the potential, but is there a second filter behind that, right? Because I feel like, especially, and maybe you think a little bit differently, but I find it's common, like people like myself, possibly you too, that like you can see, like, man, like you can see the greater version of people, right? But sometimes it can work against you to where you're like, I don't know if they don't see it for themselves, but to bet on potential, is there a second filter? Like, look, I could see what most people could do with their lives, but this is how I know if they're actually going to be committed to doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It goes back to the comment I made about character. Skills are one thing. We obviously need skills. And sometimes there are hard skills like financial skills, and there's soft skills like marketing, and there's everything in between. But, I wish I could do it. I wish I could interview their parents. So a way, since you're not allowed to do that, the best thing I would do is I would ask a question like, explain to me the best time of your childhood and see where that takes you, because then you're going to learn about the character of the person. The other thing is, don't always think because you're hiring somebody, you have to hit a home run, because hiring is a two-pronged approach. You're going to take a bet on somebody because you don't really know them until you know them. But then again, you're giving them a shot at living up and beyond their own, dreams and their own aspirations. So it's a two-way street. So you can't try to pick the best person. You have to pick the right person. And the right person has to be somebody that you think, based on some of the softer things you heard in an interview, are going to maybe be disruptive in a company. When I joined Asics, there was a lot of heavy lifting to be done. And I told the team, I said, listen, I need you all to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And you know what? That's the kind of work environment anyway that will become ultimately the most rewarding, for the people, not only that you hire, but for the people that are within the company.
Yeah, no, great answer. All right, let's go into, and by the way, guys, remember, if let's just say you're like, well, I just started my business, right? Like, every piece of this conversation matters. It may not right now be relevant to where you are right now, but if you write down these notes and remember this, a year from now, you may be so busy that you need that hire, right? And you need to be able to interview somebody, to fill that next position, to give you leverage so you can work on more high priority, high paying, activities. Right? So just understand, this is for everybody. I don't care what season you're at right now. If you have a growth mindset, you're going to be in that season at some point, and I pray that you're in that season at some point to where you're going to need to know these skill sets to continue to build around you so you can continue to rise. All right. What's the common mistake when hiring a manager?
So that's a good question. How do you become a manager? By becoming a manager. So the hiring mistake is as I said earlier, by hiring qualifications. Well, they were managers in other businesses. Yeah, but that doesn't mean they were good managers. It still comes down to this certain amount of personal skills that somebody has. How do I communicate with another person? Do I recognize and acknowledge the other person, no matter what their level might be? Am I a leader or a manager? Am I a leader? Leaders don't lead, people follow. So there's different skills. And again, you have to be instinctive. And of course, this instinct, we all have it inside of us. You're all successful on this call. You want to be more successful. You didn't get here because you couldn't be successful, but it's your instincts that I think really matter. The other thing that I would say is to have somebody manage your business is kind of scary, because you're giving them a certain set of keys. But on the other hand, sometimes the failure is the success. And I think you have to let a manager, fail. They can fail. What's the old saying? Fail often, but fail early. And I think that's part of it. I don't think this success is this magic wand that it happens to people and all of a sudden they go in and the world changes. Also, I think managing is a process. So I think we sometimes treat hiring and managers as it's a pass fail, when actually it's an evolution, and it's also graded from A to D.
Yeah, and that just reminds me, if any of you guys attended our live event a few months back, we had a world champion UFC fighter, Eddie Alvarez. He came in and spoke. And at one point, he was the first UFC champion and another like combat sport champion at the same time. And he sat in that room and he goes, well, let me tell you guys something. He goes, who's the biggest loser in this room, who lost the absolute most, more than anybody in this room? And he's like, it was me, right? But he was like, I just continued to challenge myself, to move forward. And, most people aren't willing to take risks because they're so afraid to lose, and that was a powerful statement coming from one of the best in the world when it came to fighting. He was in there with humility saying that he was technically the biggest loser in the room. I was willing to go through more losses to become a champion than most people would ever think to do. And that's just another testament to where, you know, exactly what he's saying right here, man. It's like you can't be, and you can't. I was just listening. Nick Saban, Alabama coach, he puts out some gold. With Instagram, it's pretty cool because they take these little clips of him speaking, and I never like heard this side of him. But like that's one of the things like he consistently talks about is, you know, just he puts out, you know, just some really good content about lessons about, you know, one of the mistakes that he made as a leader was he was very transactional back in the day. He's like, if we won, I was happy. If we lost, right, they would say I was just pretty much pissed off. He goes, when everything changed, what it was when when we lost, I used that as a teaching moment, right? I went and I actually cared, like I showed my people that I cared about them. And that's when everything started to change. And imagine that as a leader when one of your managers or employees, they did something wrong or whatever, and instead of you laying the hammer down, right, you were like, you know what, you had that total mindset shift. Nope, this is a teaching lesson, right? And I promise you, those people will ride or die for you and go above and beyond, go the extra mile for you to grow a company together if they know that, hey, look, in order for me to do big stuff, I got to take risks. Mr. or Mrs. Leader, right? Like I'm going to do things that I haven't done before, and it's got to be okay if, you know, and there's, you know, I'm sure that there's filters to this, like, you know, calculated risks, right? But they have to have that piece to know that if anything does happen that goes wrong, you're going to be there to support them and teach them, because that's the only way that they're going to get next level is by doing things that they haven't done before and taking that risk, being uncomfortable, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, right? So, Great stuff.
Let me jump in on that one.
Yeah, let's go.
A couple tiny points I want to add to that. So, you know, I like Nick Saban as well, but the founder of LinkedIn told me that there was a saying by Mike Krzyzewski that this is a rule that he uses when he runs his business. It's called next play. So if the team comes down the court and they score a basket, Krzyzewski, Coach K says next play. If they go down and it's a turnover, he goes next play. You don't dwell on, you know, what went wrong. So you're not going to fix it that way. The two other things, when I first joined Timberland, that was my first president's role, and they were over $1 billion at the time. And I had to really ponder this. And this is, it doesn't matter if you're president of $1 billion company or if you have, I think it's more pressure and actually more prestigious to be the owner of your own business. And anyway, I realized that being the leader or the president or the executive of a company, it's not about power. It's about the power to serve. And I think this is true also of managers. I think managers, if they want to be successful, a manager will tell their team, you don't work for me, I work for you. And as my father used to say, who was proud to be in the Navy, he used to say, the first thing the captain should do is look at the ship through the eyes of the crew. And there's all of these things where you're flipping the idea. You know, I never found my job to have immense pressure in performing for results. I had my jobs always had immense pressure to performing for the people that I served in the company that were doing all the real hard work. I hope that's helpful.
Can you say that line that your father said? Look through the
first thing the captain should do.
Yeah.
Is the first thing the captain should do is look at the ship through the eyes of the crew.
I'm telling you, some of the stuff that you guys will, you know, if you're present on this call, which I always tell everybody, be where your feet are. Stop half-assing all the things you're doing throughout your day, because you're never going to get traction. You're half-assing everything. Right? So if you are dialed in and present on this and you're writing this down, I'm telling you, these things, whether it's your family, I mean, look, you're leading your family too, by the way. Like, you want to become better fathers, better mothers, like, these are rules to life. And I want you guys to remember this, because if you're doing the right things, you're going to be saying the same stuff to the leaders that you're coaching. Right? So good stuff. All right, we got another question from a friend of mine, Justin. He's a partner at a payroll company, and they're doing some pretty big business, but they have bigger visions, right? Bigger goals. So when they get to that point of, let's just say 100 million, 200, like, billion-dollar company, do the KPI folk is the do you focus on the same KPIs with a smaller company than a bigger one? Like with that billion-dollar company, what KPIs are these meetings around that everybody focuses on relentlessly that drive the business? Is it different than if you're a smaller company?
Actually, it's not different, but I will also say this: every billion-dollar company used to not be a billion-dollar company. So the KPIs should be fundamentally the same. They're just shaped a little different because the more revenue you do, the more complexities there are. And so KPIs are fairly basic things. First of all, they need to be achievable and attainable, but not easily. Back to the uncomfortable, being uncomfortable.
Ooh, see, I never heard that. That's good, but not easily. That's
Yeah.
really
You want, you always want to make sure that if your wingspan is, 6 feet, maybe you should go for 6.5 feet. And I think because 6.5 feet, you probably could get there if you really stretch, but you want to be within your reach, but you don't want low hanging fruit. Low hanging fruit will fall off the branch before the fruit that needs to be ripened, right? The other thing about KPIs is that, you have to, back to the point about consumers, you have to be solving a problem. So if Toyota and Honda each have cars, one is called the Camry, and one is called the Accord, and one is called the Camry, right? Right?
Yeah,
And
we'll just call it that.
they're basically the same thing. One has a different shade of blue, one has a different size cup holder. They operate on the same price, and they just try to compete on, slight and continuous improvement. But if you start a business and you're solving a problem, or you have a problem to solve, like for example, when Uber first came out, it was called Uber Cab, and they were going to put yellow cabs out of business, and there was too many headwinds with regulation, and so they failed. But then they took the cab part off, they called it Uber, and they decided to solve a problem. And the problem was very simple. Johnny doesn't want to buy a car. He doesn't want one. He doesn't have the money for one. But he does have to go from point A to from point B occasionally. Maybe he could ride with Susie because she does have a car, and he helps her pay for it because she's given him a ride. In other words, it's called ride sharing. And it was solving a problem of getting from one place to the other. It was not trying to beat a competitor. So you have to have a point of differentiation, in your business. And with that point of differentiation, let's say you're in the insurance business. The point of differentiation, if you look at, I'm fascinated by television and all the commercials with insurance companies, Jake from State Farm, Progressive, all of those things. They spend a ton of money doing that because they're creating personalities that they want you to belong to their brand, but their service is fundamentally the same. A lot of it is governed by whatever state you live in, et cetera. But they try to come up with a point of differentiation, and it's not just a cute commercial. It's your goal, even though you're trying to make your employees comfortable being uncomfortable, you need to make your consumers comfortable. They feel like that even when they're not talking to you, they're not seeing you, that you're there and you got their back. And so, this idea of having point of differentiation is one thing, but if you're solving a problem, that's also another. The other thing, I want to throw this out so I don't forget it. My son, Patrick, who is now at Vans, the graphic artist, when I've come through New York, and when he lived in New York, he's now in California, we'd always have a beer. And when I was named CEO of Asics, he put his hat on and goes, "So Dad, what does a CEO really do?" And I
This
said,
is a great question. I was this all right. This I was going to ask this. What's
and
the name?
he was in his late 20s at the time, and he was going to solve the world, and every CEO is an idiot, and all that young people always think. And I don't know why I said this, but I thought about it, and there's probably more depth to it. I write about it in the book. I said I only do four things, Patrick. I look, I listen, I think, and then I decide. And the only way you can look, like for example, when I was at Nike and I was in sales management, all of a sudden we noticed there were a lot of black baseball cleats being sold in Washington D.C. and also tennis skirts for women. So we figured, wow, baseball and tennis must be really happening in Washington D.C. Well, I went into the market, come to find out that the boys were buying black baseball cleats because at the time, the prom said the only rule was you had to wear black leather shoes. So they loved their Nikes. They knew they couldn't wear sneakers at that time to the prom. So they were wearing baseball cleats because they fit the description of black leather shoes. Very clever. May not make for great dancing shoes. Now, the girls were buying tennis skirts, not because they had a great backhand, but because they wore them as cover-ups when they rode the metro, the subway, to the splash parks. So, sometimes, what we see, and if you look at paper, you go, wow, tennis skirts and baseball cleats. You have to look, and then you also have to go in the market and listen. And that's how I found out what the real catalyst was for the growth of these two categories. Thinking. I get up every day at 4:30. It's a religion for me. I'm pretty much retired now, except for some board work and some consulting. And I do it because I need time to think. If you don't have time to think, you're never going to be able to decide. Thinking is not getting up in the morning and saying, okay, got to pick up my dry cleaning, got to get the car washed, walk the dog. That's not thinking. Allow just your generous thoughts to overwhelm you. Always have something nearby that you can jot something down that piques your curiosity about something. But that's where all your decision making is done. An athlete works out really hard. If I had to run 120 miles a week, that's not where I got strong. I got strong when I rested. And that's what you have to do. So when you're working out, you think you're building muscle. You're not. Your muscle's building when you're resting. It's the same thing with thinking. You need time to think. And then all of a sudden, I think your decision making will come easy to you. And by the way, I don't mean easy as in like this. I just think easier. It'll all make sense to you. The biggest decisions are never made. They're made for you. So I just think these are some, I thought those 4 things were important, not just for managers, not just for CEOs. I think it's important for if you're a business owner, even if you're just in the market as a salesperson and you're cutting your teeth in an industry, the fact that you're looking, you're listening, you're thinking, and you're deciding in that sequence, I think will give you a lot of clarity. And also, I really do believe it can catapult your career.
So one of the many things I heard from that. So my buddy Justin, just like this is a payroll company. What I was hearing too was like a KPI is like looking at the trends, right? Measuring the trends. Like what are people more fascinated in? And that takes time to sit back and like look, not just like I hit X amount of calls, this amount of sales. Sometimes you could be jamming so much attention into a category that like, because you didn't sit back and think, you're running into a brick wall. Wow, I'm telling them to hit this, to prospect this, prospect. It's like, no, if you actually sit back and look based off of what you were saying, you would notice that the trend is this is where all the money's at. Like, so go down here. Like, all right, start measuring that. So trends for your business, and this is every square on this, whether, we got Brian Walsh who owns a masonry company, a concrete company. Like there is a trend in something. So, as you continue to grow outside of like sales numbers, KPIs can be a trend there. So great stuff, man. Great stuff. All right. What else? Scheduling time to think. And this is an art, right? Trying to run these calls. I'm trying to be a student at the same time and make sure I ask good questions and take notes. But when you said scheduling time to think, I always go back to that one story. I'm pretty sure it was a guy named Jesse Itzler. And he got to this table and he was trying to get into this boardroom for a company that he was creating called Marquee Jets. And he pretty much booked a fake meeting. He told these people that he was this person and he wasn't. He got to the table. Next thing you know, he did the pitch and they really liked it. And somebody came in for this CEO. He only had like 10 or 5 minutes with the CEO, right? And he was like, all right. And the guy warned him. He was like, look, he's going to give you 5 minutes, but if don't take offense. But if he doesn't like it, he's out in 2 minutes. Like he will get up and get out. And next thing you know, he's sitting there talking for 10 minutes, and one of his assistants, come in the room, and he starts asking her. He's like, look, or she starts asking him. When can you do a follow-up meeting for this? And he's looking at his calendar, and he had it was like a written out like schedule, or not like iPhone or whatever. And he was like, I was completely blown away because when she mentioned one specific time, he's like, nope, I can't do that. That's my time to think. And Jesse Itzler, right, was like, that blew me away. I've never heard anybody ever say they were scheduling time to think. And that is exactly what you're talking about right here. It's probably talking about your ass at some point. He's probably trying to get a meeting with you, and it's probably you the whole time. But
You know,
yeah,
I will say this too, that you think about your payroll company. I also think, that the best companies are basically invisible and seamless. So if you think about what does a payroll company do, he could look at it this way. He can say, hey, you know what I do? I provide a service to companies, it automates their payroll. Or you could say, I have to make sure that every hardworking employee of that particular company gets their direct deposit on time, so they don't even know that my payroll company exists. So there's a seamless part of it, but it also, I don't say that you should treat your company differently. I think it's so that you can think differently. It gives you just another avenue to broaden your perspective and your horizons. But thinking is really important. When I was growing up in the Bronx, and every Saturday they'd have a track meet in the Armory or in Van Cortlandt Park, and my father would always want to drive me, and I would say, no, I'm going to take the bus and the subway, even though it took probably a lot longer. And I did it because I wanted to think. I wanted to think about my race. I wanted the quiet to consume me. To this day, I do that on airplanes. I don't do work on planes. I always try to sit by the window and I try to think. Sure, I'll watch a movie. Sure, I'll read something fun and enjoyable, but I never work on an airplane or on a train. I just use it as time to think. And I think everybody should find that within themselves too.
yeah. One of those times for me, and recently, I don't want to say too recently, but the value of thinking time. So there will be nights when I can't go to sleep, right? And you're in bed, it's like, so many people, if you're in bed for an extra hour, you get restless, you're on your phone, and it's like, this is valuable. Like, you know how valuable it is to like sit there and think about what you want to do with your life? What's the next best idea that can make you a lot of money? Like, this is valuable time that most people don't even use. There is most people don't use their calendar the right way. So they waste probably hours in their day, but there are pockets where you can think, and if you're one of those restless sleepers, like, hey, one visual, Gene, do you ever exercise visualization too? Is that a big thing for you or not?
Yeah, so I was trained that way as an athlete. So every time we'd have to do a 10-mile run in the afternoon, which I found boring, I used to use it. A lot of the best athletes in the world use it as visualization. I was taught by a sports psychologist, when you're on those runs, think about your next race. Is it going to be raining? Is it going to be sunny? Is it going to be hot? Is it going to be cold? Is the pace going to be fast? Are you in the middle of the pack? Are you in the back of the pack? Are you leading? So by the time I got to the race, every possible scenario has gone through my mind. So visualization creates preparation.
Now, guys, think about that with your sales, with your meetings, visualizing the perfect day. I think I told you guys with that book, The Secret, I have a routine now every single day where it's scheduled in my calendar. So in the morning, I visualize the winning day, all the stuff that I want to happen happening. And it is wild how, and you back it with belief and action, it's wild how things will start just coming your way. And just to hit on that visualization point, a couple years ago, and I say this because you're a New York guy, I had a friend of mine, Dana Cavalier. He was the strength and performance coach.
I know Dana.
Oh, no way! Yeah, I love it.
I met Dana when he was with the Yankees. Yeah, he
Exactly right.
to visit me at Under Armour, so I know Dana quite well.
All right, so he was sharing his story. Awesome story. He has a farm now, just so you know, and he runs it like high standards. Like you can tell, he's so dialed in with how he's building the story of that farm and all that stuff. But anyway, he was talking about how they were in the locker room, and I forget the name of the athlete, but he was laying there and he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm visualizing, Dana. I'm visualizing like the way I'm going to play this game at a high potential, where I'm visualizing me hitting the perfect pitch. And it's a powerful thing, and you'd be surprised how you will react, like in your sales pitch, the way that you speak, the way that you operate when you visualize that happening at a high level.
I think if you visualize all outcomes, including bad outcomes, by the time you get to the actual meeting, a pitch, presentation, whatever it may be, even the bad outcomes will deliver a good outcome because you're already prepared for it. So visualization is hugely important. And I still to this day do that.
Love that. All right, let's finish it off with this. Guys, I put in the chat if you have any questions. I mean, I rattled off about 20 good ones. So hopefully my goal, like Gene was saying, the reason why I pick these questions is because I ran it through the filter of my community members and whoever watches the recording. That what are the best questions that I feel can be most relevant and answer a lot of questions in my life and in my business right now, which is why I chose those specific questions. Let's talk about your book before we sign off, Gene. I see it in the background. It's called Chasing Four. Could you explain to everybody what the book's about?
Yeah, what I do, I'm Irish, so I pride myself, and I'd say this to everybody out there that leads a business: be a storyteller, not don't just go for data and insights. Be a storyteller. And the book tells pretty much some of the stuff that I talked to you guys about, how a kid from the Bronx somehow had a business career, and all because of the cover of that magazine or writing that letter. But there's three parts to the book, and the last part of the book is called As I See It, where I talk a little bit about my particular view on leadership, little things like I always tell everybody, don't read books on lead. You can read books on leadership. That's a silly thing to say, but I read books on leaders. I want to know who they are, how they were raised, how they think, because they wouldn't have a leadership book if you didn't know how they got there. So, and then the other thing, and I'll share this in the spirit of time, there's a thing about business and life, and there's this thing that swirls around sometimes that we stumble across. You can never plan for it. It's called magic. And so in the end of the book, I finally get into the part where I did break the 4-minute mile, but it was all by magic. So what I did was Marty LaCory, who was my coach, got injured. Jimmy Carter had said there wouldn't be an Olympics for the U.S. in 1980. Marty was scheduled to go to a race in Kingston, Jamaica. He couldn't go. He got injured. So he called the meet director, which is a guy named John Carlos, who is iconic for being one of the guys on the stand holding the glove up with Tommy Smith at the 68 Olympics. Anyway, John Carlos says, okay, I'll take this guy. So I go down there, and it was May 9th, 1980. And I got third behind the world record holder and the former world record holder, and I got my 4-minute mile. But that's not the story. The story is 15 years later, I had a small section in my little library at home in Cohasset, Massachusetts at the time, and I noticed the clipping from that race. And what I noticed was it was May 9th, 1980. Well, the only true blood child I have, Patrick, was born on May 9th, 1990, exactly 10 years to the day of breaking the 4-minute mile. So May 9th used to be an important day to me because that was the day I ran my 3:59, equivalent mile. But actually it became more important to me because that was the day my one and only son was born. So sometimes when you're working hard and you try to get to a goal, or sometimes there's a little magic along the way.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, this was an incredible call, and how this all transpired and you being on the Zoom was magic to me after meeting you last week. And man, it's as you're talking and you're going, now just briefly with this new shoe, what's the update on this? Is this going to get released? Is it still in like the infancy phases of still being developed? Just so I can let everybody know about this.
Yeah, so this is the guy that I was with, who you met, Martin Dean, was my creative director when I was the president of an outdoor company called Merrill. And Martin and I have stayed very, very close, and he created this brand on his own. And of course, as all designers do, they're up somewhere up at the International Space Station, and it's my job to pull them down to where the oxygen is. So he created this product. It's called Clever, QLVR. It's on Instagram.
I'll drop it in our community too. Yeah.
And it's a women's only shoe, and I think that's why it was great to have. Was it your wife, I think, Devin, that tried the shoe on? So anyway, but it's not to sell shoes. This is just a great idea that he has. He's very successful, and he just needed somebody. And that's what I think everybody on this call should do. You should be another set of eyes and ears for somebody else in business around you. I think that's the way communities grow. I can talk all day about my athletic world, but I think there's some things that might help somebody else in a completely different field, because I think the fundamentals are the same. And that's all I was doing with Martin. He was in London for a weekend. I went to have lunch with him. Lunch was at 1:00. We didn't leave there till 6:30.
Wow.
Yeah, they didn't kick us out either, probably because we had a few beers. But anyway, and it was magic that we got to meet you guys. You guys you were very kind when I was on my way to the restroom when you stopped me, and
Yeah.
you know, and I think that's the way the world works. So you know, like even I'm delighted to meet everybody on this call. If anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, you know, I'm not quick to get back sometimes because I'm busy. But if you ever need advice or a pat on the back or, you know, a punch in the nose, reach out to me on LinkedIn. But I love your community and I love what you do and I love your energy. And I'm not only glad you share it with the people on this call, I'm glad you shared it with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gene. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for this wisdom that we can take in the rest of our business, our lives. And this was incredible. And this is what the harvest is for, giving, you know, business owners access to people who've achieved like you, and just get whatever wisdom that we can take from you. And most importantly, you know, we hold each other accountable to execute the best we can. And that's the harvest work that we do in here. So, Gene, it was an honor to meet you and continue to grow this relationship. And I look forward to, you know, sending people your way that I feel could be of value to your life, to try and do my part and make sure that, you know, I can add value to you in any way. And thank you so much, guys. Guys, grab his book. I'll drop it in the community too. Thank you all for making that commitment to yourself, to continue to get those mental reps in, to be the highest version of yourself, guys. Have an amazing day. Happy Thanksgiving too, Gene. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Everybody.
See you guys.
Take care.